Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Wise Woman podcast. I am so deeply happy to be here with my friend, Cathy Heller. Cathy, thanks so much for hanging out with us.
I love hanging out with you. I would happily do it whether we were podcasting or not podcasting.
Amazing. I so agree. And we have so much in common. We've just been gabbing for the last half hour before hopping on here, which is so healing in itself. Cathy, you have so many wonderful things that you're sharing with the world. What are you really into right now? What's lighting you up?
Oh my gosh. Well, what's lighting me up is I wrote this book called Abundant Ever After, which is coming out. And what's lighting me up is I can't believe that I was brave enough to say the things that are in this book because, I'm a manifester in human design, and my human design coach said to me that manifestors, they marinate on their big idea for a minute. And it's usually after the age of 40 that they really bring those ideas to the world. And I think we were all once in seventh grade, so we know what it feels like to want so much to belong. I have a daughter. My oldest is 12, my youngest is 8, and my 12-year-old wants to wear exactly the shoes that her friends wear because belonging matters more than individuality and authenticity at this point. And having been in seventh grade, I definitely took my time before I was willing to be the disco ball that I really need to be. And, disco balls are either really beautiful and light up a room, or they hurt people's eyes, right? Because not everybody is going to agree with everything that is us. Because if you, by definition, when you choose to be authentic, then you choose to have your point of view and you stand for what you believe. And by definition, that means you don't agree with everything and everyone all the time, right? Which makes you just get absorbed into the wallpaper. So this book started out when I got this book deal, it was a little bit more of a business book for women. And I had this really uncomfortable knowing that I needed to go to the publisher and tell them that I really needed this book to be really what I think the giant radical spiritual transformation that allows us to manifest whatever we want to create on the 3D level. And they got excited and curious, and then they wound up saying it's one of their favorite things that they're putting out this year. And that feels awesome because it's a risk. But typically, when you create something, most people who create wind up publishing in the world something that is the average of everything else that they've heard. And then
Mm.
once in a while, somebody takes the risk to say something new. And what is being said in this book is really the core of what makes me feel like who I am. And that is very much the combination of where my Judaism and my Jewish practice connects to my meditation practice. And that started at 19. I was a world religion major studying and comparing. My senior paper was about the comparison between Siddhartha, who was the Buddha, and Moses. And my teacher had said no one had ever done that as a thesis, but the truth is that they have a lot in common because they were both born a prince in a castle. They were born into that, right? Moses
Right.
obviously was adopted into it at like 3 days old, but the other one both grew up in a palace, and then chose to go into nature and release themselves from the material world. And then both led huge movements of people to find what was a middle path of true connectivity between the physical world and the non-physical world. So they actually have so much in common. So I've always been very interested in stillness and also in the repairing of the world and being on purpose, but also being within. And so I've always had a yoga practice, and I've always also had a meditative practice that eventually then I went to Jerusalem and I spent 3 years there, and it combined very nicely with me with a spiritual practice. And then I spent several years at UCLA at the Mindfulness Center and studied the science of what happens when we meditate, which is why you and I literally can finish each other's sentences because so much of this is an overlap. But that is what's lighting me up, is that for the first time, this book is me putting into the world whatever I have found to be the keys to unlock the portal to how to do this thing called be a person and show up and connect to our greatest potential. So it's very fun to be anticipating that coming out and what effect that might have.
This is delicious. This is expansive and exciting. I love all the overlaps. It's like my favorite place to live and hang out. Let's anchor this in a little bit. Can you give us an example of some of the practices in the book?
Yeah, I'll give you sort of a story that sort of begins it. My first trip to Jerusalem, I was there really first to just explore the land, right? So we were in the Golan Heights, we were Jeep riding in the Negev desert, we were camping at Mitzpeh Ramon, which is like this big crater, meteor hit the earth. And then on the last day before we were supposed to leave for the airport, my friend said, why don't we go to some class in Jerusalem? And I was like, okay, like I hadn't even considered that, just so crazy. It's like going to India and eating the food and not having gone to sit down and meditate, right? Interesting. So we go, and perfect for me, I manifested the perfect teacher because he was a Jubu. He was a Jewish and Buddhist rabbi who was also a psychologist, and he had this scruffy beard and cute sandals, and I just loved his whole vibe. And I just happened to walk into his class, and he wrote the word Shabbat on the board. And he said, does anyone know what this word means? And I truly didn't really know. Like, I thought Shabbat was a Friday night dinner. I didn't even know that it was it's actually 25 hours, but I didn't realize it was a whole day. And he said, we understand the meaning of a word from the first time it's ever used in the Torah, in the Bible. And I said, oh, that's so interesting in and of itself. And he said, the very first time this word is used is when Abraham is meditating. And I literally, my jaw dropped. And he said, the idea of the Sabbath is a 24-hour meditation. He said, but let's look at the verse. It says in Abraham, and it uses this word. And he says, and when he sits in this kind of stillness, which is Shabbat energy, God appears. So he said, when we return to the stillness within, God appears. And we all have that key. We can open that door when we sit and dwell in this space within ourselves, in that kind of stillness. That was it for me. I canceled my trip home. I extended my trip. I stayed for 3 years. I just kept extending it. So that's in the book. So I often say to people, I mean, we could just go so deep, and we'll do as much as we can in the minutes that we have, but the same way that you select what you're going to wear for the day, it is your job in the morning to select how you're going to feel today, and to select the radio station that puts you in connection with the divine. And so literally, I mean, I have about a 25-minute meditation practice, but people could spend 90 seconds and just anchor. And that feeling of closing your eyes and saying, what would ease feel like today? What does love feel like today? And then feel it fully in your whole body. That's like a little beginning of the practice. The next thing I'll share, my real true sort of Yoda rabbi, teacher, mentor is Rabbi David Aaron, who I then met in Jerusalem and studied with him for 3 years and continue to study with him all of these years later. He's been on my podcast probably more than anybody, and he's quite phenomenal. So he shared with me that, first of all, he said, we are all someone because we're some of the one. So that concept is in the book. We're a masterpiece because we're a piece of the master. All there is oneness, right? The eyeball physically only sees things in 3 dimensions. So it sees things as cubes, and so it perceives separation, but we know that that's not true. So he shared with me that a lot of people talk about the law of attraction, and what they really mean to say is the law of reception. The word Kabbalah comes from the word lekabel. Lekabel means to receive. So Kabbalah means reception. It means receivership. But what does that mean? It means that is literally our job in this life. So he explains it really well. This is also in the book, where he says, the best way, he says, I can teach this to you is the concept of a radio. Because he said, if you were to take a radio and put it down right next to you and turn it on, this phenomenal thing happens where all of a sudden you're going to hear music. And then you really could turn around and ask yourself, where was the music a second before you turn the radio on? The answer is hidden in plain sight, right here. And how on earth do we unlock what is hidden in plain sight? We have to have the capacity to tune to that frequency. So we are each energetic beings that vibrate at different frequency. Most of the time, what is appearing in our 3D reality is appearing that way because the radio is tuned to static. And there's no music there. It's like in between all the songs and it doesn't have a good reception. You can't hear it. That is because we're identifying with the part of ourselves that's not true. It's an ego. It's not connected to anything. It's not plugged into the divine. It's not plugged into God. But when you find your way to plug into God, you get full bars of signal. Music turns on. And then you manifest because you are available for the frequency of the highest dimension. So when people say to me, how do I manifest? I'm like, you are the radio. And here's what's also interesting about a radio. Not only when you turn it on, is there music? When you turn it off, there's no music. But when you turn it on, you get to decide what song you hear. And when I was growing up in South Florida, we had 97.9, but we had 97.3. And those are both still 97, but they're totally different songs. 97.9 was oldies. 97.3 was like, what's current? That's not even a full frequency away. It's like basis points of the frequency. That's how different it is. So one person is experiencing one manifestation, one person is experiencing a different manifestation. And why? Because it's a different radio signal. So it's my favorite thing to share. I learned that at 21. I'm 45. That was the beginning of the rest of my life. That was the Control-Alt-Delete on the software. That was the clearing the browser history of the garbage. That was the false identity. And then I came into who I really am, which has nothing to do with the person I was pretending to be who didn't have any music on. So then I moved to Los Angeles and people would say, how is it that you just continue to like whatever, people will say like, everything you touch turns to gold. That doesn't make any sense. It's not even possible. You have $50 million of your podcast, or you started making millions of dollars, and why? How? What are you doing? Like, you don't have a PhD. It's like, because it's all in escrow. All the time. So, and the thing about abundance, which is also in the book, because the book deals with money a little bit, because we have so much resistance, we have so much shame. We've put money on such a pedestal that we've ruined our lives because the thing that we keep shaming is the thing that we keep thinking we need and want, which is why we shame it. And you don't need the money. Like, people say to me, they want to manifest. And I'm like, what do you want to manifest? And they're like, a beach house, a Range Rover. And I'm like, you know what? I'll tell you why I call bullshit on that. Because you have way bigger dreams. You know what you want more than that list? The lightness of your own being, flow state, nonstop creative downloads, the connection, the meaning, the contribution. Then they go, you're right. And then I say, that's wholeness. And another word for manifestation is wholeness. We manifest what we let go of needing because we manifest the literal mirror of what the vibration is. So the radio turns on 97.3. It literally picks up that exact frequency. You cannot manifest from lack. So I had to deal with money in the book because it's the pink elephant in the room. It's the thing that everybody keeps thinking that they're lacking. So it keeps pushing them away from wholeness, and you actually don't need any of it. And then when you get it, here's the cool thing about money. Currency, the word currency comes from the word current. It's meant to keep moving. So really, whatever we receive, whether it's love or Wi-Fi or oxygen or water or joy or money, it's meant to be something that we become a conductor, a lightning rod, a current for. period. So actually, the more money you make, the more of a steward you become. And then you ask yourself, oh, so that's why it really feels good to have anything, whether it's love or joy or money, because I just get to keep moving it into the world, because there is only the oneness and everything is connected, which means it improves the entire ecosystem of the garden when one thing is thriving. So there's a lot that gets broken down in the book because unfortunately people believe in the lie, which is separation, which comes from ego. So that's why I began with you're someone, you're some of the one. And then we kind of move into manifestation based upon the Jewish mystical view of that. And those are some things that I think could be extremely helpful practices.
Cathy, I love it. It's beautiful. I resonate so deeply and completely. And what if someone just can't access their higher frequency right now? What if they're just in it? Maybe not necessarily devastated or in the depths of depression. They're just disconnected, maybe a little bit numb. Something that I see so often is this cycle of like that mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, where you're just kind of realizing that maybe the relationship you're in isn't really the one that's going to be the one you bring life into the world with, or the job isn't as fulfilling as you thought it would be, or your food doesn't even taste as vibrant as you thought it would when you originally ordered it off the menu. Things are a little dull. How would you recommend somebody to drop back in when they are in that state?
Okay. So I'm going to tell you two stories that are going to illuminate this. When I was in Israel, I said to Rabbi Aaron, I'm ready to do the most spiritual possible thing. What is it? Is it like silence for 30 days? Is it this? He goes, oh my God, I totally have it for you. Are you ready? I said, yeah. He goes, when you walk out this door, you're going to walk down this little side street and you're going to find that you can go to this door. I'm going to give you the address. And I'm like, yeah, I'm writing down the address. He's like, knock on the door. There's a woman who lives there. I'm like, yeah. And he says, she's a widow. Offer to do her dishes. And I burst into tears. He said, every second we have the opportunity to find the greatest happiness, because the opposite of depression is not happiness, it's purpose and contribution. And when you feel that you have significance because you loved someone into life, you have a level of happiness that you can't have. The brain is obsessed with itself. That's what leads to all the suffering. So let me give you an example. My dad passed away July 3rd. I went through the funeral. I went through Shiva. Re-entry was very difficult. I didn't want Shiva to end. It was so incredibly powerful to sit with people and no one's wearing any mask or makeup or filter and just sitting with you and letting you feel your feelings. It's quite awesome. And then you have to go back to the world. And the cars move quickly. And I kept thinking, don't people know my dad died? Like, why are they driving so fast? So it took me a few weeks. So a few weeks later, I finally am like, okay, let's go out to dinner. Like, it's been several weeks. I have been in my pajamas. I haven't really gone out. Like, we're going out. But I was a little bit like shaky and feeling really sad for a good reason. We go to the sushi restaurant. It's a sushi restaurant in LA that's like a really good one. So it's a hole in the wall and all the tables are really smashed next to each other. So I'm sitting there with my husband and my daughters, and I can hear every word of the couple sitting next to me. And I'm feeling sad, but I hear them. And I turn to my husband and I say, I think they're on their first date. Because I hear the energy and I hear what they're saying to each other. It sounds like first date conversation. So I said, I'm going to do something for them. So I stand up, I turn to them and I said, are you on your first date? And the woman's like, yeah. I said, you guys are so cute. Can I buy you dessert? So she said, sure. So I say, pick the dessert and then we will pay for it because we're leaving. So we leave. We take our daughters to see this Minions movie. I get a text from this woman on Instagram. She follows me on Instagram. Like, she asked me for my information before I left. Fine. So she says, thank you so much for the dessert. I said, you're welcome. I said, oh my gosh, are you going to have a second date? And she said, I don't think so, but he's very sweet. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, but you were everything tonight for me, because she said, I'm a widow And this was my first date in 4 years. And I have not had the courage, and no one's ever stood up in a restaurant and offered me dessert. And I felt like it was a sign from my husband that the world is a loving place and it's time to accept more love in your life. And I said, well, you won't believe this, but tonight's my first night out since I lost my dad on July 3rd. And I said the date because it was like a few weeks earlier. And she said, my husband passed away 4 years ago on July 3rd. So I feel as though I'm the luckiest person in the world, because every day my rabbi said, we're not being asked to change the world. We're being asked to change the world for one person every day. And when you know that you're needed, the amount of massive synchronicity that is so uncanny that shows up in your life winds up completely and totally proving to you over and over again that there's nothing to ever be sad about when you tap back into your flow state. So when you're feeling down, when you're feeling sad, look for someone to give to. And as soon as you get back in that place, your ego, your mind, the blizzard of self-obsession will reduce. And by contributing, my kids, we have like a kind of like a practice in our house where, like, if the gardener comes or the mailman comes or the Amazon guy, we run to give them a cold drink. My kids argue over who gets to give the Dr. Pepper, because the smile that you get feels like magic. When you really think about what you really want, why do people want a trip to Costa Rica? They want to feel great. But how many times have you been on a beautiful beach and your brain is focused in a place where you can't enjoy the beach? So what you really want is well-being. There's something about the way we're designed as human beings where fulfillment and happiness gets turned on. It like trips the wire when we are in love, when we're giving love. Now, love is by definition for no reason. That's what makes it feel like love. When you give someone you've never met who's mowing your lawn a Dr. Pepper, just because the smile you get back is different than writing the gardener the check at the end of the month in exchange for the service. We have these opportunities all day, and then you get so excited. You're like, oh my God, how can I find that joy today? It's everywhere. It's so easy to find it. So that's number one. But number two is, we often, and I'll go a little deeper into the way that I coach people, I don't know is a limiting belief. When people tell me, I say, what do you want? I don't know. That's bullshit. You do know, but you've convinced yourself of a lie, which is I can't have what I want. So much of the reason why we also get sad is because we're in resistance to what we know that we know. So what happens is, again, the way we manifest the really beautiful big things that we want is we surrender the outcome, but we co-sign the dream. When you co-sign whatever it is that you believe that you want, then in and of itself, you've just opened what is going to become magical and incredible. And I will tell you this, Dr. Lisa Miller, who's been on my show, she wrote a book called The Spiritual Child.
Yeah, she's my professor from Columbia. I know her quite well.
Yeah, she's adorable. She was at my house recently. And she said, which you probably know because you've learned from her, but I'll just repeat this piece. Very often there's this thing that we think that we want to happen, and she calls that the red door. And she says, on your way to this red door, you're like doing everything to try to make that work and make that red door open. But sometimes it doesn't open. And then if you look back at your life while you were trying to make this red door happen, there's like a hairpin turn along the way where somebody says something or something leads you to something else, and there's a yellow door that pops up. And you walk through this yellow door with ease. It just opens. And as you walk through it, you realize that it's better and more fulfilling than anything that would have happened in the red door. And she said, if you look back at your life, every major, amazing, incredible event actually is all a yellow door. So the idea is, if you just give yourself permission to want what you want and surrender and know that there's a river of life that's always leading us into wholeness. Because the universe, by definition, is in and of itself, it is not net neutral, it's net positive. If you cut your finger without you doing anything, your finger moves into repair and starts to heal itself. If you put a tree in the ground and put water anywhere on that earth, it's going to go try to find its way to it. It knows what to do. But the Japanese have a great word for this, which is ikigai, right? Your purpose in life, which is the combination of three things: what you love, what you're great at, but what the world needs. And very often the world needs something different from us than we think we're meant to give, and is moving us into wholeness. And the contrast is actually the blessing that is allowing us to be moved into where we need to be. So to zoom out and to know that there is this radical, geometric, perfect dance between the honeycomb and the bees, and the way that we all are interconnected with all that is whole and all that wants to be whole. That's always, I mean, when I came to Los Angeles, I had a record deal at Interscope and I got dropped. And then I had a record deal at Atlantic and I was like, oh, perfect. So Interscope didn't work out, but I'll be at Atlantic, and I loved my record producer. And then that didn't work. Well, long story short, I wound up writing music for film and television for 10 years. And then I started a podcast at 37. And as soon as I got on the mic for my podcast, which was just going to be a side nothing thing, it took off. Now, when I came to LA, I thought I'm going to go use my voice. But I had one particular thought of how that was supposed to go, and it worked out differently. So the combo of my answer is, there's nothing to be patient about, because in the meantime, every time is the right place and the right time to be loving. And when you are, you become a magnet, and the radio turns on, and amazing, gorgeous, cool synchronicities happen. And along the way, the river will lead you to where you're actually meant to be. And that's where we let go of trying to control it. The brain, the last thing I'll say, and you know all of this, but I'll just say it again. The brain loves you and wants to protect you, so it tries to control everything, because people who are the most controlling are the most afraid. So when you let go of control, you actually get something bigger than the dreams that you had, which are bigger dreams, the ones that put the universe in the greatest state of wholeness for where you need to be.
Cathy, the story is out of this world. That is the most beautiful story I've heard in a really long time. The synchronicities of July 3rd, being present and buying dessert. And I love how you say the opposite of depression is purpose, because I so often think about purpose as in you're worthy to be, like, you're here, you're innately worthy. You're perfect in God's image, you're innately worthy. Your purpose is to essentially enjoy this lifetime in a way that, wow, feels nourishing. And I also love how you dive deeper into how to show up with love, how to serve, and how to move through what you said earlier, which is to belong as well. I also think it's so wild that you brought up Dr. Lisa Miller, because she's the creator of the program that I graduated from Columbia. And I feel like I refer to her all the time on so many different podcasts. So I love that that just came through for you as well. That's such synchronicity. There's a couple questions that I wanted to dive into from here, but this feels so good. And I'm so in it with you. And it's so nice to be in the presence of somebody that I hear how this is your bima. Like, I really hear how you take the metaphors and you share biblical stories, but also personal narratives, and you put it up in a bow together to help people dive deeper. It's beautiful narrative. It feels really good to be in the presence of it.
That means so much to me. Thank you.
And if I may, what about right now? Given our belief systems, to believe in a higher power as we understand it, understanding that we can change our frequency, that we can go wash the dishes for somebody else. And also, the news is upsetting. The increase of anti-Semitism is devastating. Being a Jewish woman today, and just the reflection and response of what you said, how a controlled person, someone who's trying to control everything, is somebody who's living in fear. I've definitely seen this in myself, and I am typically a very tranquil, serene, go with the flow, chill mama. Motherhood changed everything for me, and I think October 7th rocked a lot of stuff as well. So when we are almost in the presence of current events, and it's really bringing up the hard stuff, and we are feeling a little bit of that fear, or a lot of bit of that fear. We are feeling a little bit disconnected from God, or we're wrestling with God, which I talk about freely all the time. How do we come back home?
First of all, I wish I could just sit and give you a hug for like a 10-minute hug. Second of all, I just this past Saturday night in my backyard hosted 200 people for an event for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors to get up and tell their grandparents' stories, because they're not here anymore, except there was one grandson who is here, whose grandmother is here, which is Dr. Edith Eger's grandson, Jordan, was here with his wife. And I'll be with her in San Diego in November. She couldn't make the trip. She's now 97. But I bring this up because I want to share what I shared that night. I didn't know what I was going to share, and very often I just have everyone close their eyes. And once I close my eyes, I know what I'm going to say. So that's what I did that night. And I want to share this with you because this is something I shared just a few days ago. There was a Holocaust survivor years ago who told me a story. Her name was Esther Youngrice, and she was unbelievable. Like, she used to speak in New York City to a group of 1,000 people every week. That's how big of a crowd she would draw. And she was only like 4'5" and beautiful and dressed to the nines and Hungarian and just wonderful person. But she reminded me that there is a blessing in our morning blessings in the Siddur in Jewish tradition. One of the blessings is to ask God to make you like a rooster. And she said when she was in a concentration camp at 5 years old with her head shaved and lice crawling all over her, watching the smoke from the crematorium, she held on to that. And she said years later, she had moved to the States. She was living with her then new husband and had built a life for herself years later. And George W. Bush was asked to go to Jerusalem to the reopening of the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem. And since she is such a powerhouse, he called her as his guest, and she went. And on the way back, she fell asleep on the plane. And he tapped her on the shoulder, and he said, "Do you know where you are?" And she's like, "No." And he said, "Look out the window." And he said, "You're flying over Germany in Air Force One, coming from the state of Israel, returning to the United States of America with the president. I just wanted you to know that." And she started to cry. And she said, "This is why my father told me to be like a rooster." And she said, because a rooster is the very first one on the farm that knows just when the night gets the darkest, at this very second, it can't get any darker. The rooster crows and says, "Wake up. Don't you see the light is about to break? Don't you see that the dawn is here?" And she said, the Jewish people are the rooster for the world. So, my grandmother was a rooster, and she survived, but she didn't just survive. She thrived. And when she came to this country after everything she had already been through, she had no money and no food, and she loved to dance. So she used to take an eyeliner pencil and draw a line up the back of her leg, so it looked like she had stockings on, because she was only allowed to go into this club if she was wearing pantyhose, but she couldn't afford them. And she lied because this club was restricted to Jews. and she pretended to be Italian. And my grandfather and her became this like star dance team, and they were on the radio. They did like radio competitions, and they would win all these like dance competitions. And he lied and said he was Italian, and they fell in love. And she said, "I can't marry you, I'm Jewish." And he said, "I am too."
Oh my God.
And they built a business. And my grandfather worked really hard and created the cardboard that goes into men's dress shirt collars. And him and his four brothers made so much for their family and their kids. And they danced. They went into the city and danced every night. And he died at 63. He died with a cigar in his hand playing poker. And he had told my grandmother about a week before he died, for some reason, "I just want you to know I love my life. I had the most amazing life." When I was in high school, my grandmother went to high school with me. She got her GED because she didn't go to school past the 4th grade. And we did algebra together. And she lived down the block from me my whole life. And my parents got divorced, and it didn't matter. She was always there. And she was the happiest, most optimistic person. So we were built for this moment. And in the 80s and 90s, my grandma would tell me how much anti-Semitism there was, and I didn't know what she was talking about. And she used to say, if you literally scratch beneath the surface, everyone hates Jews. And I was like, no, they don't. And she's like, no. The majority of the world hates Jews, and you'll find that out, but you'll be okay. Because she said to me, if you take a candle and you light it at 1 PM, you can't see it. But if you take a candle and you light it in the darkest night, every tiny light is so powerful. And she said, that's what we do. So the opportunity is to be the candle in the darkest night. And all the generations that came before us have given us what we need to do that. And we are only here right now as souls that chose this lifetime because we totally volunteered for that mission. So that's the mission. It's not for the faint of heart. But you will see this generation become more Jewish than any generation. And our children will become the loudest, proudest Jews that the world has seen.
Ever.
Probably ever.
Cathy, these stories are beyond. It's as if your neshama is so, your inner light is just sharing the exact medicine that and also I trust the listeners need to hear. It's a warm bath, and it's so fun to be in your energy. It's beautiful.
So beautiful and kind. I receive it. And I'm just really, really blessed that I stand on the shoulders of giants. Because the acknowledgments in the back of my book, my publisher at Simon & Schuster was like, how do you know this many rabbis and your grandparents and the details of your grandparent? Like, your acknowledgement section is like, I'm
A
just,
chapter.
yeah, I'm just a student of the most incredible. I won the DNA lottery.
Absolutely. Lador Vador. And you're passing that down to your 3 beautiful daughters and to all the listeners that are digesting this in their wombs.
I mean, I just want to say this one thing. with that, and I say this in the book, the mic drop of Abraham, people say it wrong. They say, well, Judaism is a monotheistic religion. They believe in one God. That's wrong. That's not the interpretation. Shema Yisrael, which is our most dominant prayer, means that God is one. It means that everything is oneness. And why that's so huge is the same reason Jews don't convert people to be Jewish, which is so radically different than anything else. And it's because you don't need to be Jewish to be one. You are already intrinsically connected to the divine. You are the divine. It's all oneness. So when I say we won the DNA lottery, it's like to come from the teachers of that consciousness that turns that light on for the world is just unbelievable. And Rabbi Aaron says, oneness is not sameness. In an orchestra, you don't want every instrument to be the same one. You want the brass and the wood and the triangle and the cello, and they're different, and that's what makes it extraordinary. So it's like communism is about sameness. Oneness is about diversity. Oneness is saying you can't remove God from anything, so all of it is the contrast and textures of this one force. And to that point, Reb Dessler says that everybody has a nikuda b'chira, which means a point of free will in their life. And what that means is not everyone has free will in the same point, meaning for many of us, we don't use our free will to not murder. Like it's just, you're just not going to. But your point of free will might be not learning to be patient, right? Like everybody has their actual thing that requires their free will, right? Other things, it's part of you. You've passed that, or you're not going to speak gossip, or you're not going to do this, or you're not going to steal. You don't have to think about, you don't have to make a choice to not steal. You're just not going to, but there's something else. So what he says is, in order for us to actually, though, have free will, there has to be an equal amount of darkness and light in the world at all times. And so as much as you can point to the darkness, there's an equal amount of light. And if there ever was a time where there was more light than darkness, we would cease to have free will, because there has to be an equal amount of contrast in both for us to be able to make a choice, and for it to feel like a choice that's coming from a highest consciousness that's choosing the aligned path, right? That's the brilliance of being a human, is that you get to choose, right? And there's also more we can say, where the Torah says that certain people, when they've chosen to do evil for so long, they actually lose their free will. They're not choosing anymore. They're just conditioned to do wrong, right? It says that Pharaoh, when it says God hardened his heart, it meant there was no way out anymore. He sunk so low, he couldn't choose good anymore. He's completely addicted to choosing the wrong path. And he became like a zombie to that. And there's a lot of that in the world, right? So too, there is a equal amount of this world in humanity that chooses the good. And so it's really hard for me to be convinced that anything is ever different than it was, because I know the way God created the sun and the moon, and I know that there's a half amount of the day that's bright and half that's dark, and it's always been 12 and 12. So I don't buy it. Like, I'm just like, that's the beginning of the story. If we were living 1,000 years ago, we'd talk about something else. But since the moment that Abraham arrived on the scene, for whatever the reasons, and we could have a whole other hour conversation, we are at the eye of the storm. Eye of the storm. The evil comes for us first. Doesn't matter if it's Germany or Stalin or Spain or Egypt, it's us. So we got to be the rooster. And now we have there's a new way that's presented itself, but it's all really the same. It's all the contrast.
Cathy, you are an inspiration. It is so fun and incredible to be in your energy and this devotion, my redevotion back into studying Kabbalah. It's so, we need evil. Like it has to exist. It's something we know to be true in Kabbalah. It's one of the
God says
sides of the
so.
Sufliot. Yeah. And suffering is a pathway.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It
Thank
is
you
so
for the love.
incredible.
You give me so much love, and I feel like I was just like hugged and hugged, and I love you, and we're friends, and we've been probably friends in other lifetimes together.
I, so much of what you shared is a really powerful reflection and reminder for me as well. Any last wisdom you would like to share with all of our listeners?
Just you, each of us, just each one who's listening, including both of us, being us and being us with an open heart, loving, is like proving our existence every day. And it really truly sheds light and makes an impact in the field around us. It's like when you throw a stone in the water, it will always make a ripple. So just know that. And that in of itself, you don't have, we live in a world that's like achievement focused, but like that is an achievement. And it,
Mm,
the energy, when people say all day long, I say, what am I supposed to do? I say, who are you supposed to be? That's the better question. So that's my thought.
amen. Modani. How can everyone find you?
Oh my gosh. So go buy the book. It's called Abundant Ever After, and you can get it on Barnes and Noble or Amazon or wherever. And then come follow me on Instagram. If you do buy the book, you can go to cathyheller.com/book and tell us you bought the book, and we'll send you bonuses like an affirmation journal and some other yummy things and a sneak peek to a few chapters and more fun stuff.
Thank you so much, Cathy. So fun having you.